Love is patient. Love is kind. That is going to be our message for this weekly marriage encouragement. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. But before we do that, I'm Khalil.
And I'm AJ.
Yes. And we provide content like this to enrich, inspire, and edify married couples as well as singles who are prepping for their season of marriage ahead. So if you are married or even if you are single, we encourage you to stay tuned into this because we're going to be just sharing some very relevant points and encouragement in regards to this specific verse and how it can help you prepare for marriage if you're not yet at that point. But let's go ahead and jump into this verse. As again, we know love is patient, love is kind. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. It also goes on to say that it does not envy, it does not boast, and it is not proud. You may have been to a wedding of some sort where maybe you have heard this verse spoken during the service. Even if you don't identify as a Christ follower or a Christian, this is a scripture that is very, very relevant and for right reasons. I mean, who doesn't want patience and kindness in their relationship and in their marriage? Yet I would say that, this is something, especially when we think about patience, that, sometimes we might struggle with.
Yeah.
Even in marriage. And I would say for us, these are two qualities that I think we're constantly working on. But for you, Wonder Woman, when you think of patience and when you think of this verse, what comes to mind for you? And why do you think that patience is something that people sometimes struggle with in relationships?
Absolutely no. I think it's a great question because I think even when we profess words on the wedding day, we get so accustomed to just sharing those, or even with specific scriptures themselves, and just seeing it at face value, but not really breaking it down and understanding the root of it. So when I think of patience, I think of action. I think of not action and necessarily something happening, but I think the root and the importance of patience is us slowing down and having perspective and making sure that we are considering one another in the midst of our relationship.
Right, exactly. When I think of patience, I think of it in two ways. I think of it in one sense, you think of acute, specific situations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. Our little miscues in communication or misunderstandings, or, me having to, maybe wait on you as you're getting ready for date night. I mean, little things like that. You talk about, hey, it's necessary.
I do a good job.
But it's necessary, though. It's necessary. I'm not knocking it. It's just things that we go through on a day-to-day basis in relationships. So I think about in those little circumstances, but I also think about patience in the long-term sense, meaning that, when you get married, you're basically saying, I do to a lifelong of committing to be patient with that other person. And I think to your point, that's something that we don't often consider when you're talking about vows and, getting married and things of that nature. We just think of the happily ever after part. Yeah. But we don't often think of that process of, hey, you're committing to this person that's going to continue growing. They haven't arrived yet. They're not perfect. We will never be perfect, but you're committing to being patient and enduring with that person as they grow and as you grow. And so, well,
and I think that, right, we're going to the scripture itself. So when we say love is patient, right, that reflection, like you were sharing, of God's love, of Jesus Christ's love for us is represented through that patience. And I think a lot of times we get set in our ways and we might be like, well, I'm just an impatient person, or my spouse is just, whatever. And we type one another in a certain perspective. They're always going to be late. They're always going to do this. But what is your perspective on whether or not patience is a trait that can be grown and developed? And if it is, what are some ways in which it can be developed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, yes, it absolutely can be developed. I think all of these qualities that are necessary for life can be developed. It definitely takes time, takes patience to develop patience. Yeah. One practical thing that I would say is, and this is something you've talked about before, is I think it begins with understanding what patience is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, oftentimes we think of patience as just waiting,
Mm-hmm.
but patience is more than just waiting, right? You can wait on something and be complaining.
Yeah.
You can wait on something and be frustrated and in your feelings, but patience is more about a posture in which we wait, in the sense that we have a sense of peace and contentment as we wait on whatever it is, even if, you know, hey, it's difficult.
Yes.
Right. And so I think, to get a little bit more practical, you know, as you're going through those situations with your spouse or with one another, where you find yourself maybe getting frustrated, maybe getting a little upset, I think that is an opportunity as an individual to have a quick level set reality check. And thankfully, this is something that the Lord, he brings about that conviction within us, where we can think to ourselves, and this, I try to do this, I don't always do it well, but to take a moment and think, I'm flawed too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not always the best person to work with either.
Yeah.
You know, what is it like to be on the receiving end of some of my stuff? And so I think having those moments, again, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, I'm working on it, but I think that is a practical way to hopefully develop some patience towards the other person. It's putting yourself in the shoes of someone else dealing with you.
Yeah.
And I think that can help.
Yeah. And I think that perspective builds a level of empathy and just an understanding of the other person in that process. So, no, I appreciate that. That's really good. That's really good.
One thing I want to do is I want to take a look at a couple of other translations of this verse. And I love this one. It's in the Amplified version. It says, love endures with patience and serenity. So it goes a little bit deeper there. Love is kind and thoughtful. And going back to, you know, kind of what you said, this scripture, it deals with human interaction. However, you know, what the Apostle Paul, the writer of this verse, is telling in this verse is, hey, these are the qualities that the Lord displays to us as his people and as his creation. He is patient, he is kind. And so we're basically being asked, just as scripture says, you know, love your neighbor as yourself, love others as the Lord loves you. That's what this is saying. And so as the Lord is patient and he is also kind with us, so we are meant to be with one another. And then another one that I also like is in the New King James, it says, love suffers long and is kind. And I think upon hearing that, you're like, suffers long? Like, why would anyone want to suffer long? You know, we think of suffering often in just a purely negative sense. Yeah. But suffering can be a good thing when it's in the right context. So an example would be, you know, maybe some of you all out there, you work out, maybe some of you are runners out there, or whatever you do, maybe for exercise. And y'all know how it is. You get maybe to that second lap or that second mile, whatever, you know, that second set, and you start feeling some things, right? You start feeling some burn. You start huffing and puffing, and, you know, maybe feel that little bit of tingliness, you know, that's acidosis. That's what that is. I'm getting my scientist brain now, but, you know, that's suffering, you could say. But that's not a cause for you to quit, right? If anything, that is a sign to keep pushing, to keep enduring. You know, imagine if you were watching the Olympics and you were watching a race, and then all of a sudden someone pulled out after the second lap because they started getting tired, and they said, I don't want to run no more. Like, you look at them like, what is this person doing? You know? And so love requires this sense of suffering long with one another in covenant, meaning that, hey, I'm not suffering based on how you're treating me. No, we're suffering together in this process of us growing together. And so I think that's a mindset that oftentimes is missed in marriage. And even when, again, we hear those vows and we hear that spoken in weddings, like when we hear love is patient, that's basically saying you're committing to suffering long with someone else. But suffering has great results.
Right.
when it's in the right context. And so we just have to keep in mind that it's for a reason, that suffering is for a purpose.
Yeah. And I think that that's patient endurance, right? That patience, that persistence, that understanding that happens in the process is the core of really developing those muscles, if you will, that you're sharing. And I love how you tied it to long term, right? Like we're in this for the long run, and it's not always going to be easy, and patience is uncomfortable, but it's still worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Patient endurance produces good results in the long run.
Right.
Let's talk about this second component, kindness, which is another very powerful quality, a very powerful term. But we were talking recently about something that we had heard someone speaking about the difference between niceness versus kindness. And notice that the verse says love is patient, love is kind. It doesn't say love is nice, which I think it's very distinct, you know. And so I would just like to talk a little bit about distinguishing the difference between niceness and kindness. And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's easy to assume that they're synonymous, right? At face value, because you might interpret someone being kind as being warm and compassionate and quote unquote nice in their demeanor. But I think the root of both, instances are totally different, right? To be nice could come off from a root in your heart posture as superficial, or saying it only because you have to, right? Yeah. Apologizing just to be nice, like when your parents made you, or maybe they asked you, encouraged hardly, or whatever you say, to apologize to someone, right? That was because you wanted to be nice. But kindness is really out of that generosity, that compassion for the other person, that understanding, bringing in that term again. That's the full scope of what it means. And kindness, to be kind, also means being truthful, right? So you can be kind and someone may not interpret it as being nice, but if you're speaking in love and in compassion, when you're sharing information, you're expressing that kindness and understanding towards the other person in the process.
Right. One thing that I looked up, in terms of thinking about kindness versus niceness, I love how you said niceness can be done with a superficiality, right? Like you can be nice to people, that without truly having a genuine love for them and a genuine care for them. You can be nice with an ulterior motive, but we're called to be kind to one another. And that's interesting. So kind, the word kind has the root word kin in it, which is how the term we use for family oftentimes, like kinfolk, but I think that's very telling because, it's almost like saying, treat that person like family. Yeah. In a sense, if you interpret it that way. And so
family that you love,
of course. Yes. Obviously some family might, you might not like a lot, but I think kindness it goes hand in hand with the patience piece, because, in marriage, there might be times when we don't feel like being kind to one another, or you don't feel like being patient with one another. But knowing again that, you're both two individuals growing through your imperfections, can hopefully help add some perspective to that. What do you think are some practical ways in which, spouses can be kind to one another in marriage? And I would say specifically for husbands or for the men out there, because guys, sometimes we struggle sometimes. Like sometimes I'll be struggling, and just to be honest, but in marriage, I mean, men and women, we are different. Yeah. We're very much the same, but also very different. And so what would you say are maybe some practical ways for the men out there to kind of exhibit kindness?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, the common communication perspectives like tone, demeanor, posture, those types of things when you're expressing something. I think it also is, knowing the love language, if you will, based on the 5 love languages of your significant other, of your spouse, and really being able to lean into those in a genuine way, right? Like we're going to be able to see that you're complimenting me just because I like compliments, but do you really feel that way, right? I can tell And your significant other can tell if you're being honest. And we'd rather hear the truth in love. Right. In love, I said that, not just put it out there, the truth in love, right? Mm-hmm. At the right timing, than just being nice, right? So I think from a practical perspective, if that is, your significant other really likes acts of service in terms of love language, right? Being kind might be noticing and discerning that dishes are piling up and the laundry's not done and they're really stretched with work and the kids are, nonstop right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe what I can do as a spouse, as a male spouse, to be helpful would be to not ask, should I do the dishes, but to just do the dishes. Right? Yeah. Not needing permission to be kind, right? Right. Because I don't think that any wife would be like, no, stop. Seriously, I didn't want you to do the dishes. Yeah. Right?
Or at least I don't imagine. Yeah, I don't imagine either. Something might be wrong with you. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. I was actually thinking what you said from a practical sense. Just the acts of service. Yeah. And one of the things that I've learned throughout life, and especially in marriage, is that one simple act of generosity can go a long way. Yeah. And so just taking the time to consider your spouse, their needs in the moments. Yeah. So, hey, fellas, if you're making yourself a snack or something to eat, something as simple as, hey, baby, do you want something? You want me to fix you some water or some, something.
The offer. Yeah. It's so kind.
You want some fruit snacks?
Love language.
You fruit snack eater. But yeah, one simple act of generosity can go a long way, and just taking that time to be considerate in the moments is a good practical way. Yeah. To kind of show kindness. Now, I know that there may be some couples here who are like, well, this all is great, y'all. Patience, kindness, I know they're great, but y'all just don't know. My spouse is a little difficult to deal with. Mm. My significant other is difficult to deal with. How can I talk to them about the things that bother me? So maybe let's just speak a little to how can people out there speak to their spouse about maybe even some grievances that they have, but in a healthy way. Yeah. What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's making sure that the time, there's never going to be a perfect time, but there is a best environment for those conversations to happen. So I think making sure you're in a space and place where it's just the two of you, where there's trust. It may not be the best time to bring it up, at the dinner table with, the family of your spouse there or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Just having that wisdom is one piece of it. And then I think prefacing it and sandwiching it, if you will, with showing in a genuine way, right, some of the things that you have really appreciated about how you've been growing together or what you've been noticing, and then also bringing it up, right? Straightforward, straight talk, and listening to their response. Mm-hmm. Not trying to solve for them, but listening because they might have a different perspective. There might be something they haven't communicated to you about why they've been acting that way or what's been on their mind more specifically. Mm-hmm. And then kind of having that healthy dialogue from there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Couple of things I add to that. In the way that you present those grievances obviously really matters. Like you said, tone and those things. I think one tactic is when you discuss what it is that's bothering you, instead of just being, a sense of you do this or I don't like this. Yeah. I think it's sharing, hey, when you do this, it bothers me. Or when this happens, it bothers me in this way.
It makes me
feel mm-hmm. this way. So kind of putting the spotlight or kind of, instead of just throwing the darts at the other person, it kind of points it back to you to help them to see how something makes you feel instead of you just coming off in an accusing tone of dot. So that's one thing I would say. A second thing is, just really making sure that you're addressing the thing and instead of attacking the person. Yeah. So try not to tear down the person's character, your spouse's character, because again, they, you married them,
Right.
and they're made in the Lord's image, and so that can be difficult because when you're married, you know your spouse, right? So the thing, you have the ability to really be lethal
Yes.
with your words, and so you really have to be careful with that. And so making sure that you try to address the issue and not so much attacking the person, I think can really help in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really good point. We were actually talking to my parents, married 34 years at this point, and asked them.
35, actually.
35?
Yeah, because you're about to be 35.
Yep. Oh, wow, 35.
Honeymoon baby.
Man. So, if you caught that. But, we had asked them, what's one of the things that's really helped in the longevity of your marriage and your growth? And my mom said, just be kind.
Yeah.
Just be kind.
Yeah.
And it sounds so simple, but to your point about how we have the ability to really tear down our spouse should we choose.
Right.
Right. And instead making that mature choice to resolve issues in house and to make sure that we're communicating with one another and empathizing with one another and getting external professional support if need be.
Absolutely.
Right. All of those things work together to form a good work, a marriage work, right? Together. So I just thought that was really powerful.
Exactly. And one other thing I'll add on to that, as we're talking about these practical things, you all, I would say to wrap all of those things that we said, it really does take leaning on the Lord for strength in these areas, because we're human and we have limited capacities in our ability to exhibit these qualities, patience, kindness. And so, we have to go to a limitless well in order to draw strength, in order to exhibit these to our significant others, to our spouses, because you can only do but so much in your own strength. And so it really does take a leaning on of the Lord.
Yes.
Pray, seek him for those things, and he will help. But some of you all might still be wondering, what are some ways in which I can have better communication and better conversations with my spouse or with my significant other? Maybe you find yourself in a cycle of arguments with your significant other. Something that starts off small ends up just blowing up way out of proportion. So, if you want to find a way in order to be able to speak to your spouse with a better cycle of more open and healthy communication, then click on this video that we have here in the top right, and then we'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.